Would you open the door if someone begged you for their life at 3:33 a.m.? In The Door Between Worlds, Ethan returns to his family home, only to uncover a horrifying secret buried beneath generations of lies. Strange knocks in the dead of night, shifting reflections in the mirror, and ancient rituals long forgotten all point to a curse that demands blood to remain sealed. As the boundaries between reality and something far darker begin to break, Ethan must face the impossible: break the chain or become its next prisoner. At 3:33 a.m., the knocking started again. It was subtle at first, just a faint tapping, like someone brushing their knuckles lightly against the old wooden door. But as the seconds dragged on, the knocks grew bolder, heavier, until they echoed through the hollow structure of the house like hollow drums calling something awake. I sat up in bed, sweat clinging to my skin despite the frigid air that crept through the drafty windows of my father's house. My house now, the house on Red Hollow. When the lawyer handed me the keys last month, he called it a fresh start, a place where I could build my own life after my parents' passing. I doubted he had any idea what this place truly was. Hell, even I didn't know then. Not fully. All I knew was the house had stood here for decades, isolated near the edge of Black Pines Forest, in the outskirts of a town that most maps barely acknowledged. Red Hollow wasn't so much a town as it was a cluster of decaying homes, scattered along a single winding road. The nearest neighbor lived half a mile down the road, a hunched old woman named Thelma Granger, who seemed to watch me from her window every time I drove past. The rest of the town's population barely acknowledged my presence. They spoke in hushed tones, offered tight smiles that never reached their eyes, and quickly changed topics when I asked too many questions. They all knew something. I was certain of that. The knocking continued. 3 times. Always 3. I stayed frozen for a moment longer, listening to my heart hammering in my ears. The rule flashed through my mind. My father's rule. The one he had drilled into me when I was barely 10 years old, trembling in this same bedroom. Never open the door after 3:33 It was etched in my memory, whispered in my nightmares for years. Back then, I didn't understand why. I simply obeyed. But now, years later, alone in this cursed house, the unanswered questions gnawed at my sanity. Suddenly, my phone buzzed against the nightstand, snapping me out of my paralysis. The screen lit up, displaying a message from an unknown number. "Have you opened it yet?" My stomach tightened. My fingers trembled as I tossed the phone aside like it was venomous. The knocks stopped. For a moment, the silence was even worse. I forced myself out of bed, every creak of the old floorboards beneath my feet reminding me of how empty this house truly was. As I passed the upstairs hallway, the shadows stretched unnaturally, following me like they had a consciousness of their own. The walls felt closer than before, the house breathing softly around me like some great sleeping creature. When I reached the staircase landing, I paused. Below, the front door stood tall under the pale moonlight spilling through the half-drawn curtains. I could just make out the brass peephole, waiting for me. A familiar pull gnawed at my chest. I grabbed the small flashlight from the nearby table and made my way downstairs, each step deliberate and careful. My breath fogged slightly with the cold, dry air, and with each descending step, the house seemed to grow colder, more hostile. Standing before the door, I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. Not even the wind outside dared to disturb the heavy stillness. Swallowing my fear, I dragged over the old step stool, something I remembered my father using when I was too small to reach the peephole myself. Climbing onto it, I peered through. Nothing. Only the empty porch bathed in dim yellow light from the flickering lamppost at the edge of the property. The gravel driveway, the thin dirt path leading to the woods. Empty, yet deep inside, I could feel it. Something was out there, watching, waiting. I stepped down quickly, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Maybe it was just the wind warping the old wood. Maybe the stress was catching up to me. After all, I had barely slept since moving back. Then I saw the package sitting beneath the mail slot. It hadn't been there earlier. Heart pounding, I picked it up carefully. The box was small, wrapped in thick brown paper, with my name scrawled across the front in my father's unmistakable handwriting. My throat tightened as I carried it to the living room. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, I found a tattered leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and frayed along the edges. Resting on top of it was an old cassette tape, blood-stained, sticky to the touch. My breath caught as I read the single phrase scrawled across the first page of the journal: "Never open the door." A chill sliced down my spine. The house groaned above me as the wind outside picked up again. Shadows danced along the walls like thin, stretched hands. I stared at the objects in front of me, feeling the walls close in. Why had my father left me this? Why now? I thumbed through the journal. Many of the pages were filled with hurried writing, erratic handwriting I barely recognized. But others had been ripped out entirely, leaving jagged stubs where the most crucial part seemed to have once been. The tape recorder sat nearby, practically begging to be played. Part of me wanted to leave it alone, to lock it all back inside the box, throw it in the fireplace, and pretend none of this existed. But another part, a darker, hungrier part, wanted answers. With shaking hands, I inserted the tape into the old portable player that sat dusty on the mantel. The reels whirred for a few seconds before crackling to life with distorted static. At first, there was nothing. Then came breathing, labored, panicked, my father's voice. "If you're hearing this, it's already begun." My blood ran cold. His voice was fractured, desperate. "You need to listen carefully. They knock. They always knock 3 times. Do not answer, Ethan. Whatever you hear, no matter how much they beg, do not open the door." There was a brief pause, and then a faint knocking sound came through the tape, echoing in perfect rhythm with the real knocking I had just heard minutes ago, as if the two were connected through time itself. The tape hissed again. Then a whisper I didn't recognize filled the room, as if someone was standing directly behind me. "You're next." I jerked around instinctively, scanning the room behind me, but no one was there. Only the flicker of the fireplace cast dancing shadows across the faded floral wallpaper, twisting and stretching like something alive. I pressed stop on the cassette player, my chest heaving. My father's words still rang in my ears. "Don't open the door." What had he seen? The air inside the house had grown colder, thicker, like it had taken on weight. The old wooden beams overhead creaked in protest. I rubbed my temples, trying to steady my spiraling thoughts. I wasn't losing my mind. This was real. The knocks, the voice, the package, the goddamn tape. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. Another message, same unknown number. "You're almost ready." My hands clenched. I wanted to throw the phone against the wall, but instead, I powered it off entirely. No more texts, no more whispers through plastic and glass. Still gripping the journal, I sank into my father's old armchair. Its worn leather creaked beneath me, and the cushion gave a little too easily under my weight, like something had nested there long before I returned. I opened the next surviving page. The handwriting was messier now, like he had been writing in a panic. "They keep coming back. Always at 3:33. Always 3 knocks. The bargain wasn't enough. I thought it was. But they're still hungry. If you hear them, Ethan, you run. You don't ever listen." Below the writing was a crude drawing, 3 vertical slashes that resembled claw marks, or tally marks. I shuddered, quickly flipping through the rest of the journal. Some pages were entirely blank, others stained with brownish blotches I refused to identify. But one thing became horribly clear. This wasn't random. Whatever haunted this house, this family, had been here long before me. The grandfather clock in the corner let out a hollow chime. 4:00 a.m. The worst of the knocking seemed to pass after 3:33. Always. But I couldn't sleep, not after what I had heard. The thought of that voice, "You're next," wrapped itself around my mind like icy vine, tightening with every breath. I grabbed the old step stool again and cautiously approached the door. Part of me wanted to see if any physical sign remained from earlier. Scuff marks, footprints, anything. But as I looked through the peephole once more, I saw nothing but the empty porch and the gravel driveway bathed in dim, flickering lamplight. Then something caught my eye. Barely visible near the edge of the woods. A shape. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow stretching unnaturally among the trees, but as I focused, I realized it was still humanoid, watching. The longer I stared, the less human it looked. It seemed broken, bent, like its joints weren't built quite right. I stepped down quickly, my pulse pounding again in my ears. This was real. I backed away from the door, breathing heavily, my mind racing through options. Could I leave? Could I just pack up and drive? But some part of me knew instinctively that it wouldn't matter. This wasn't attached to the house. It was attached to me. The sound of my own breathing filled the silence until I heard something else. Soft scratching, coming from the far end of the house. I froze. The back door. It was locked. I had checked all the doors, all the windows before trying to sleep. But now, that scratching sounded deliberate. Slow. Measured. I crept along the hallway toward the kitchen, where the back entrance stood. The darkness beyond the kitchen was nearly absolute, save for the faint green glow of the microwave clock. 3:48 a.m. The scratching stopped. For a moment, there was only silence again. Then, tap, tap, tap. 3 knocks. I swallowed, gripping the counter for support. My father's words echoed, louder than ever. Never open the door. The back door was different from the front. It didn't have a peephole. Only the thin curtain covering its glass window offered any chance to glimpse outside. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. With a shaking hand, I pulled the edge of the curtain aside, just an inch. At first, I saw nothing but the swaying pines and the faint light from the distant porch lamp. Then, movement. A face pressed slowly against the glass, or at least something like a face. It was pale, almost white. Its mouth opened unnaturally wide, stretching far past where the jaw should have ended. No teeth, just a black, endless maw. The eyes were sunken pits of inky void, and its head twitched slightly like a marionette handled by nervous hands. I stumbled back, crashing into the kitchen table, sending a glass crashing to the floor. The thing remained motionless, still pressed against the window, mouth frozen open. Then it whispered. I couldn't hear it through the glass, but I saw its lips move in perfect synchrony with the words my phone had texted earlier. "You're almost ready." The air grew so cold that my breath hung before me like mist. I couldn't move. My limbs betrayed me. The lights in the house flickered and then died entirely, plunging me into a darkness so absolute it felt physical. Like a heavy sheet thrown over my entire body, I remained there on the kitchen floor, too terrified to move, too terrified to breathe. For how long? I don't know. When the lights finally sputtered back to life, the window was empty, the figure gone. But the words remained burned into my mind. "You're almost ready." For what? The knocking would return tomorrow night. I knew that now, and the night after that, and eventually I wouldn't be able to stop myself from opening that door. The next morning arrived without mercy, dragging its pale light across the house like a slow, indifferent tide. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, that face reappeared. The pale, featureless maw pressed against the glass, whispering what my mind refused to understand. "You're almost ready." I found myself seated at the kitchen table, still clutching my father's journal like a talisman. My coffee had long since gone cold. The morning chill clung to the air despite the weak rays filtering through the thin curtains. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself had shifted overnight. Subtly, imperceptibly, but alive somehow. Like the very walls were adjusting, listening. My phone remained powered off. I didn't dare turn it back on. I kept returning to the pages of my father's journal, flipping them, searching for sense, for patterns in the scribbled warnings and fragmented entries. Then my eyes landed on a new page I hadn't noticed before. tucked between two partially torn sheets, like it had been added after the rest. Rules to survive. Memorize. Do not open the door after 3:33 IMing. Do not respond to the voices, no matter who they imitate. Never uncover the mirrors after dark. Do not leave offerings outside the threshold. If they knock more than 3 times, leave the house immediately. My skin prickled reading them. The rules were so specific, as if my father had learned them at great cost. But there was no explanation, no history, no rationale. Only commands, cold, desperate commands. That same creeping question returned. What exactly did my father get involved in? And more disturbingly, how deeply am I already involved? A knock at the front door snapped me out of my spiral, but this knock was different, polite. For a moment, my pulse still skyrocketed. I hesitated before slowly approaching the door, this time during daylight. Peeking through the peephole, I saw only the frail form of Mrs. Thelma Granger standing on my porch, bundled in a heavy knitted shawl, her thin gray hair fluttering in the wind. She held a small basket in her hands. I opened the door just enough to speak, keeping my shoulder pressed firmly against it. "Morning, Mrs. Granger." Her watery eyes studied me for a moment too long before speaking. "You didn't sleep last night." It wasn't a question. I swallowed. "Not much." "I figured," she continued softly. "They always start after the first few nights. Like they're testing you." Her words hung heavy in the air. I blinked. "Mrs. Granger, what do you mean, they?" She smiled faintly, almost sadly, and offered me the basket. Inside were fresh rolls, a jar of homemade jam, and a folded piece of paper. "You should eat," she said gently. "It helps, for as long as it can." I accepted the basket, feeling the weight of her gaze. "Mrs. Granger," I tried again, lowering my voice. "What's happening here?" "My father. He left warnings, rules. What did he get involved in?" Her smile faltered, and for the first time since I met her, real fear flashed behind her eyes. "You shouldn't ask those questions, Ethan. Not yet," I pressed on. "Why not?" "Because they listen," she whispered. As if on cue, a sharp gust of wind rattled the porch, sending dry leaves swirling across the wooden planks. Both of us flinched instinctively. Filma leaned in slightly, lowering her voice further. "What knocked on your door last night isn't human. And if you invite curiosity, you might as well invite them inside." She took a small step back. "Just follow the rules, child, and pray you can hold out longer than your father." And then, as quickly as she arrived, she shuffled back down the pathway toward her house, leaving me on the threshold, mouth dry, nerves buzzing. I watched her until she disappeared around the bend. Her parting words clung to me like smoke. "Pray you can hold out longer than your father." I closed the door and locked it immediately. Double bolt. Chain latch. The house creaked again as I carried the basket into the kitchen, setting it down next to my I unfolded the piece of paper tucked inside. At first it seemed like nothing more than an old church bulletin, yellowed and brittle. But scribbled on the back in hurried handwriting were additional rules. If you hear them in the attic, cover the mirrors immediately. If your reflection moves before you do, leave the house. Don't answer if you hear your father's voice. The ink smeared in places, as if written by shaking hands. My stomach turned. These weren't just paranoid ramblings. These were instructions from someone who had seen what I was starting to see. What my father had seen. What he had tried, maybe failed to survive. I turned to glance at the living room mirror, the old one above the fireplace, tall, antique. Its surface covered by a heavy black cloth since before I moved in. My father had draped it, and I hadn't dared to touch it. Now, I understood why. The day dragged on like wet cement. I tried to keep busy, cleaning the kitchen, sorting through unopened boxes, pretending life was normal, but every passing hour pressed down on me. The closer it crept to nightfall, the thicker the air became. At sunset, I stood staring at the front door, bracing for the knocks I knew would come. By 9 p.m. I had checked every lock 3 times, both doors secured, windows latched, curtains drawn, lights dimmed but not fully extinguished. Too much darkness only fed the paranoia growing inside me. I hadn't eaten since morning, but hunger felt irrelevant. My stomach was twisted far too tightly for food. The night outside settled into a heavy, oppressive silence. Even the wind that normally howled through the pines had stilled, as though nature itself was holding its breath. I sat on the couch, the journal on my lap, and stared at the clock mounted above the mantel. Its slow, deliberate ticks marked the countdown toward that cursed hour. I already knew they would come again, whoever they were. Or whatever. I barely noticed I had drifted off until the sharp ding of my phone startled me awake. My instincts screamed as I reached for it, though I had sworn to leave it off. Somehow, it had powered itself back on. The screen glowed with a single new message. "Have you opened it yet?" I dropped the phone onto the coffee table and backed away as if it might bite me. My breath quickened. The room around me seemed to pulse, the corners darker than they had been moments earlier. And then the power went out. The house exhaled into darkness with a deep, low groan. Even the ticking of the clock silenced. All that remained was the pounding of my own heartbeat filling the void. I scrambled for the flashlight resting beside the couch. Its weak beam cut a narrow path through the shadows, barely illuminating more than a few feet ahead. The walls seemed to breathe, closing in, expanding, shuddering. Then came the knock. Tap. 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 3 precise knocks against the front door. I froze. The air turned icy around me. The knock repeated, louder this time, as if whoever stood outside was growing impatient. Tap. 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 The rule: never open the door after 3:33 a.m. But it wasn't 3:33 yet. I checked my watch. 3:02. The rules hadn't prepared me for this. Another knock, this time from the back door. Tap, tap, tap. I spun, disoriented, the beam of the flashlight jittering wildly across the kitchen entrance. My chest burned, my breath sharp and erratic. 2 doors. 2 knocks, both at once. A sharp buzz sounded from behind me. My head whipped toward the living room. The old answering machine light blinked red. The machine clicked, and a new message played, breaking the silence. At first, only static, then Nosleep, my father's voice. Ethan. The voice was warped, distant, but unmistakable. My father. "You have to let me in, son. I'm cold. Please, just open the door." I clutched the edge of the couch, my fingers digging into the fabric. My mouth went dry. "It's me. Daddy's home." The words twisted in my gut. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to run to that door and open it, to believe that somehow, impossibly, my father had returned. But deep inside, I knew better. Another knock came from the front door. Tap, tap, tap. And then from the attic above. Tap, tap, tap. My flashlight flickered, casting jittering, sickly images across the ceiling. The air thickened until every breath felt like inhaling syrup. I backed toward the hallway, my father's journal clutched tightly in one hand. My foot struck something hard. A cardboard box I hadn't unpacked since moving in. It toppled, spilling old photographs and papers across the floor. Among them, an old family photo I didn't recognize slid to the top. I stooped, flashlight trembling in my grip, and examined it. It was us. My father, my mother, and me as a young boy, standing on this very porch. But there was a fourth figure, partially obscured behind my father. A man with hollowed-out eyes, his features too blurred to identify, as though the photograph itself had rejected his presence. I felt bile rise in my throat. The journal slipped from my grasp, pages fluttering across the hard wood. One page tore loose and slid under the hallway mirror, the old covered one above the console table. The mirror. I remembered the rule, never uncover the mirrors after dark, but something inside me whispered louder now. Some terrible, intrusive urge, a magnetic pull toward the covered glass, as if part of me needed to see, to confirm that what was happening wasn't just madness. I reached out and grabbed the black cloth. The moment my fingers touched it, the knocking ceased. The house fell into utter silence. I hesitated, the silence far more terrifying than the knocking had ever been. And then I pulled. The cloth slipped away, revealing my reflection. At first, nothing seemed wrong. My pale, terrified face stared back, eyes wide, sweat glistening on my forehead, chest heaving. But then the reflection smiled. I hadn't smiled. Its head tilted to the left, slow and deliberate. My own head remained perfectly still. I stumbled backward, crashing into the wall. The reflection mouthed silent words, though no sound escaped its lips. "You're almost ready." The knocking resumed, this time from every wall, every window, every door. The house was surrounded. The mirror cracked at its center, a jagged fracture splitting my doppelganger's face down the middle. The lights flashed back on, then immediately cut out again. I dropped to the floor, crawling toward the front hallway as the knocking pounded all around me. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with the rhythm of something ancient and hungry. And then came the worst sound yet, the distinct click of the deadbolt unlocking itself. The front door creaked open an inch. A voice whispered through the narrow gap, "Let's finish what your father started." Morning came, but the house refused to acknowledge it. The pale sunlight trickled in, weak and thin, unable to push back the oppressive weight that had settled in every corner overnight. Even with the door locked again, bolted and chained, I felt no safety. The house was different now, heavier, like something had finally stepped inside. I hadn't slept. My eyes burned, my skin prickled with exhaustion and the sick electricity of fear that never let go. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the covered mirror across the room. The cloth now hastily pinned down with duct tape. My reflection, or whatever had mimicked me last night, still lingered in my mind. Grinning, the knocking hadn't returned after that moment when the door unlatched itself, as if they had made their point. As if the breach had already occurred and now the rules were different. The ringing of the landline broke the silence. Its shrill tone drilled straight into my spine. I almost didn't answer, but something desperate inside me needed to hear another human voice. I picked it up. "Ethan." The voice was quiet but unmistakable. Mrs. Granger. "I saw them last night," I whispered. "I know," she replied. Her voice carried that same soft dread, like a woman who'd lived too long in the shadow of something no one else dared to name. "It means they've chosen you now, like your father before you." My throat tightened. "You know what this is. You always knew." She didn't deny it. "They circle back every cycle. 13 years, always 13, testing the bloodline." "The bloodline?" My voice cracked. "Your father tried to bargain, but bargains don't last. The debt remains. And now you're standing where he once stood." The weight of her words hit me like a blow. I wanted to deny it, call her crazy, but how could I, after everything I'd seen, after what the mirror had shown, after the voices? "What do they want?" I asked. Her voice grew faint, almost like she was whispering through cloth. "Entry, ownership. But they can't take you fully unless you open the door willingly." "I haven't yet," she said, "but the house is already breached. They've found other ways in." I stared at the walls, feeling the crawling sensation beneath my skin. It wasn't paranoia. Something was here. "There's someone else you need to speak with," Mrs. Granger continued. "Someone who survived. Before." "Who?" "Paul Henderson. He used to be with the sheriff's department when your father lived here." I vaguely remembered the name. My father rarely spoke of people, but Paul's name had floated in hushed arguments I was never meant to hear. "He's at St. Augustine now." "The asylum?" My stomach flipped. "He's the only one left who remembers everything. But be careful. Even he's not entirely untouched anymore." Before I could say anything else, she hung up. The dead tone hummed in my ear, leaving me more hollow than before. By noon, I was already halfway to St. Augustine. The road stretched endlessly between skeletal trees, their barren arms clawing at the sky. I drove with the radio off. I couldn't bear sound. I didn't trust it anymore. Every voice now carried the risk of being them. St. Augustine Asylum stood at the end of an unmarked service road outside town, a sprawling gray husk of a building that looked abandoned long before it ever closed its doors officially. I parked near the front steps, where a single security light flickered against the winter haze. Inside, the air smelled of bleach, mildew, and old sorrow. The receptionist barely looked up as I signed in, giving me a cheap visitor badge and a room number. They didn't ask why I was here. Paul's room sat near the far end of the west wing. The deeper I walked, the more I felt the walls tightening again. The same feeling from Red Hollow creeping into this place like a sickness following me. I found him sitting by the window, staring at nothing. Paul Henderson was maybe in his mid-40s but looked decades older. His hair was thinning, the skin around his eyes sunken, hollow. His hands trembled constantly, as if some unseen vibration passed through him. He didn't turn when I entered. "Paul?" No response. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "I'm Ethan Caldwell." His eyes twitched slightly at the name, though he still didn't fully meet my gaze. "I'm here because they've started again. I need to know what happened to my father." At that, he let out a dry, rasping breath, something between a laugh and a groan. "They never stopped," Paul finally whispered. "Your father thought he could negotiate, thought he could cheat the threshold." I sat in the chair across from him. "Threshold?" Paul's eyes darted toward me finally. They were wide and frantic. "You think the door is what holds them out?" "The door was never for them, Ethan. The door was for us." I stared, unsure if I misheard him. "It's a gate," he said, voice cracking, "and the bargain was simple. Don't open it. As long as we hold the line, they feed elsewhere. Shadows, echoes, copies. But if one of us invites them directly," his hands clenched his knees, nails digging into skin, "then they step through." I swallowed hard. "My father, what did he do?" Paul shook his head violently, eyes glassing over. "He gave them someone else, the man who bled on your porch 13 years ago." His voice dropped lower, rasping. "A substitute." I felt the bile rising, the photo flashing in my mind, the stranger behind my father in that old image. "Your father bought you time," Paul continued, voice almost gentle now. "But you were always theirs, Ethan. Blood remembers." The floor felt like it was tilting beneath me. "Is there a way to stop it?" My voice barely made it out. Paul smiled for the first time, a hollow, empty thing. "No." Paul's words hung in the stale air of the asylum room, heavy and final. "No." The hollow echo of it rang inside me as I sat frozen, my mouth dry, my mind fighting against the words. "There has to be something," I whispered. "Some way to stop it." Paul didn't blink. His eyes twitched, darting around the room as though watching invisible things move. His voice dropped lower, like he feared the walls might be listening. "You can delay," he rasped. "You can obey the rules, but there's no stopping it once they choose you. They always take back what was loaned." I swallowed, hearing my heartbeat in my ears. "What if I leave the house?" Paul chuckled, a sad, broken sound that curdled my stomach. "You can leave the house," he said. "You can leave the state, the country, but you can't leave them. Once they mark your blood, it's not about where you are. It's about when." He leaned forward, his trembling hand gripping my wrist suddenly. His fingers were icy, bony, desperate. "They come in cycles. They wear your face, your voice. They knock. And when you answer, the door stays open." His breath grew shallow, and for a moment, he wasn't talking to me. He was somewhere else, trapped in whatever memory still gnawed at him. "The man on your porch," he whispered, eyes glazing. "The one who begged to be let in? He wasn't the first. I saw it happen the first time 13 years ago. Your father—" Paul's voice broke entirely then, and he fell back into his chair, shuddering. His hand slipped from mine. he wouldn't say more. Or perhaps he simply couldn't. I stood there for another moment, hoping, irrationally, that he'd speak again, but he only stared out the window, murmuring broken fragments under his breath. I left the asylum, colder than when I arrived. The sky had darkened by the time I pulled into Red Hollow again. The house stood exactly as I left it, and yet different, subtly wrong, like it had grown in my absence. As I stepped up the porch, the wind shifted. Dry leaves twisted into a miniature whirlwind near the threshold. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob, feeling a familiar vibration in the air. Low, like a hum that didn't come from any machine. I unlocked the door, but even before stepping inside, I knew something had changed. The air was thicker. The shadows clung heavier to the walls. The faint scent of earth, damp, old earth, drifted through the house like something had been dug up. I bolted the door behind me immediately. The house greeted me in complete silence. The old grandfather clock no longer ticked. Its hands were frozen at 3:33, though nightfall was still hours away. I walked through the house slowly, flashlight in hand despite the flickering lights above. Every corner looked familiar but distorted, as if the walls breathed at a different rhythm than my own. That's when I heard it, faint but distinct, a whisper, not from outside, not from the phone, from upstairs, the attic. It starts when you listen. My father's journal had warned me, but it was already too late for that. The attic door creaked as I pulled it open. The narrow wooden stairs groaned under my weight. The air grew colder with each step, every breath forming small puffs before me. When I reached the top, the beam of my flashlight shook in my trembling hand. At first, the attic appeared empty. The old crates, covered furniture, and forgotten family junk that every house seemed to collect over the years. But the air was wrong, dense, heavy. And then I saw it. In the far corner, barely illuminated, something glistened. Blood. A trail of fresh blood snaked across the dusty floorboards, leading to a large trunk pushed up against the wall. I approached, my breath coming faster. My hand reached out and slowly lifted the lid. Inside lay a bundle of cloth, soaked through with dark, wet crimson. An old, rotting hoodie. Blue. My throat locked. The same hoodie, worn by the man who had begged to be let in. The man from 13 years ago. Suddenly, movement. Behind me, I spun around, shining the flashlight wildly. A figure stood there, just to the edge of the light's reach. At first, I thought it was my reflection again, but no mirror stood here. This thing mimicked my shape, my posture, but not my face. Its skin was stretched, raw, and half flayed. Muscles glistened wetly beneath exposed sinew. The eyes were hollow, bleeding black from empty sockets. Its lips, or what was left of them, peeled back in a grotesque grin far too wide for any human face. It raised one arm slowly, fingers twitching unnaturally. I stumbled backward, my legs giving out beneath me. The flashlight clattered across the floor, its beam spinning wildly, carving erratic circles of light across the attic. The thing took one step forward, then another, but it made no sound, as if its weight didn't belong to this world. I scrambled toward the attic stairs, crawling, dragging myself down the narrow steps as fast as my panicked body would allow. The whispers followed, dozens of them now. "You're almost ready. Almost ready? Ready." By the time I reached the front door, the whispering had grown into a sick chorus, surrounding me from every wall. I slammed my body against the door, bolting it again as though it would somehow matter. The house fell quiet, except for the sound behind me. Soft breathing. I turned slowly. The mirror in the foyer, the one I had covered, was now fully exposed again, and in the glass I saw them all, dozens of versions of myself, twisting, bleeding, broken reflections standing silently behind me, staring. Each one smiled. The morning after the attic, I didn't know if I was awake or still trapped inside some fractured version of sleep. The images wouldn't leave. Those countless twisted versions of myself staring from the mirror, frozen in their bleeding grins. Every time I blinked, I saw them in the corner of my vision, waiting. The house smelled different now. Metallic, like old blood baked into the walls. It wasn't a hallucination. I could taste it on the air, bitter and sharp. I hadn't touched the journal since last night. It still sat abandoned on the living room table, pages half spilled across the floor like a dead bird with broken wings. My flashlight, which I dropped in the attic, was gone when I woke. I didn't want to know where it had gone. The rules were failing, or worse, they were shifting. By noon, I couldn't sit idle any longer. Answers wouldn't come inside these walls, and if Paul was right, this thing, whatever it was, had roots far deeper than just my father. There was one place left where I might find the truth. The town archive. Red Hollow's library was tucked into a forgotten municipal building just off the main street. Most of the town's government records had long been transferred to the county office 2 towns over, but some of the older files, the ones no one wanted to officially acknowledge, remained here, hidden in dust and mold. Mrs. Granger had warned me once, some histories don't want to stay buried. The librarian behind the counter barely looked up as I entered, her name tag reading Alice Monroe. She was thin, her eyes sunken but alert, following me as I approached. There was something unsettling in how still she sat. "Family history section?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Without a word, she pointed down a narrow hallway lined with dim overhead lights that buzzed weakly. I walked slowly, each step echoing too loudly in the suffocating silence. The room was colder here, and the dust smelled old. Thick, like it had layered itself over decades. At the far end of the aisle, several old steel filing cabinets waited like forgotten tombstones. I pulled open the one labeled Red Hollow, Incidents 1970 Present. Most files were faded police reports, missing persons, trivial town disputes, but tucked near the very back, behind a loose divider, was a thin file stamped in heavy red ink. Restricted, 2009 Incident. My hands trembled as I pulled it free. The file was disturbingly light, almost empty. Half the pages inside had been slashed, cut precisely, as if someone had physically removed entire chunks of history, but the surviving fragments were enough. The report detailed a missing person, Daniel Mercer, age 27, last seen at the Caldwell property, my father's house. My house. Witness statements had been blacked out heavily, but one line remained visible. Subject approached front door at approximately 3:33 a.m. Witness heard pleas for entry before contact ceased. Large blood loss discovered at scene. Body never recovered. The date was exactly 13 years ago. The breath caught in my throat. I flipped the next page. A photograph, grainy, faded. The front porch, the same hoodie, the same spot. But behind the blurred figure of Daniel Mercer stood my father, barely visible in the shadowed doorway. It wasn't random. It had never been random. Footsteps behind me snapped my attention back to the present. I turned sharply to see Alice Monroe standing at the end of the aisle, watching me. "You shouldn't be reading that," she said softly. "They don't like it when you dig too deep." My pulse spiked. "You know about this?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. She lowered her voice to a near whisper. "Everyone in this town knows. We just don't speak of it. The bargain was made long before you were born, Ethan." "Bargain?" My voice cracked. She nodded, her eyes darting nervously toward the dim ceiling lights as if something unseen hovered above. "Your father wasn't the first. Red Hollow was founded on it. Every generation, one must be offered. In exchange, the rest are left alone." I felt my knees weaken. "My father offered Daniel Mercer?" Her eyes softened briefly with something that almost resembled pity. "He thought he could buy you time, but the debt doesn't disappear. It waits. It circles back." I staggered back against the filing cabinet, gripping the cold metal to steady myself. "And me?" I managed to whisper. "You are the next threshold," she said. "They've been circling you your whole life, waiting for the next door to open." The air shifted again, dropping in temperature. Alice's head suddenly snapped to the side, as if hearing something I couldn't. Her voice trembled. You shouldn't stay here, not tonight. The cycle is accelerating. I stuffed the file inside my jacket and bolted out of the archive, her warning echoing in my mind like the sky was already bruising with the arrival of dusk. The long fingers of black pines cast sharp shadows across the town as the sun lowered behind the ridge. As I drove back toward my house, every mile felt heavier. The deeper truth had finally cracked open, and now it was too late to seal it again. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the last light of day had vanished completely. The house stood waiting under the thickening veil of night, looming larger somehow, as though it had grown taller in my absence. The porch lamp flickered sporadically, as if fighting against something pressing in from the surrounding darkness. I sat motionless in the car for several minutes, my hands clenching the steering wheel, watching the house through the windshield. The headlights illuminated the front door, the door I could no longer trust. My pulse pounded steadily in my ears. My father's words, Paul's warnings, Alice's terrified whispers, they all tangled together in my mind, forming a rope that tightened around my chest. There was no running from this. That much was clear now. I finally forced myself out of the car, the cold air biting into my skin as I approached the front steps. Every creak of the wood beneath my boots sounded louder than it should, like each step was being amplified by the thing inside. The key trembled in my fingers as I slid it into the lock and pushed open the door. The smell hit me immediately. Thick, metallic, unmistakable, the same coppery stench that had haunted me since the attic. Only now it was stronger. The lights inside the house flickered in weak protest as I stepped in and closed the door behind me. The air was colder than it should have been. I could see my breath hang in the living room, curling like ghostly fingers before dissolving into the thick atmosphere. And then I saw it. The trail. A thin line of fresh blood stretched across the hardwood floor, leading from the front door toward the center of the house, disappearing into the darkened hallway. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. But I followed. The trail led past the kitchen, through the narrow corridor, and stopped abruptly at the basement door, the one that had remained sealed since I moved in. The door stood slightly ajar now. A draft of frigid air breathed up from below, carrying with it the faintest sound, a soft, wet squelching. Like something alive was moving beneath the floorboards. I reached for the handle but stopped myself. My entire arm trembled. My breath came sharp, uneven. Then, from behind me, the whisper returned. "You're almost ready." I spun around. No one stood there. But the house shifted again. I could feel it. The walls contracting inward by imperceptible degrees, as if it were breathing. I backed away from the basement door slowly, returning to the living room, where the journal still lay waiting on the coffee table. I opened it once more, flipping desperately through the brittle pages, searching for something I had missed. Some clue, some instruction beyond the same desperate warnings. On one nearly torn page near the back, I found something new. A symbol. It had been scrawled in thick black ink, a jagged circle wrapped around 3 vertical lines, intersecting with a downward triangle. Beneath it, my father's handwriting read, "Seal breach point, only temporary. Breach point, the basement." As if on cue, the lights flickered once again, then died completely. The house exhaled into total darkness. I grabbed the flashlight, the beam slicing through the black like a knife. That's when I heard the first knock. Tap, tap, tap. Not from the front door, from within the house. I swung the light toward the sound, the mirror above the fireplace, fully exposed. The cloth I had taped and secured was gone. My reflection stared back at me, but this time, it didn't smile. It simply stood there, watching, blinking out of rhythm with my own movements. And behind it, just beyond the edges of the glass, a shadow moved. It pressed its hand to the inside of the mirror's surface, palm splayed, fingers too long, bending in unnatural ways. Another knock. Tap, tap, tap. This time from inside the walls. The house was no longer holding them back. I turned, backing away from the mirror as the whispers returned, louder now, overlapping, voices I recognized. My father, my mother, even my own voice. "Let us in. You're almost ready. The door is open." The floor beneath me vibrated, the hardwood flexing under my weight as if something massive pressed against it from below. The basement door groaned open wider. A blast of cold air rushed up, carrying the overwhelming stench of blood and rot. My flashlight flickered again as I stepped forward. Inside the basement stairwell, the air thickened like syrup. I descended one step, then another, each groaning under my foot. The darkness seemed thicker here, my flashlight beam devoured by the weight of it. Halfway down, I stopped. There it was. At the bottom of the stairs, standing just beyond the edge of my light, was the man from 13 years ago. Or what remained of him. His flesh hung in ribbons, his exposed ribs gleaming wet in the beam of my flash. His face, half torn, one eye dangling uselessly, the mouth split wide open into a silent, frozen scream, but his arm raised, slowly, and with a single ruined finger, he pointed directly at me. My legs buckled. I gripped the handrail, choking on the rising bile. The voice returned again, stronger than before, rising from everywhere at once. "You will finish what your father started." The basement pulsed. The walls bled. And above me, every mirror in the house shattered at once. I don't remember crawling back up the basement stairs. The next thing I knew, I was collapsed on the living room floor, my breath jagged and sharp, my hands covered in blood that wasn't mine. The house groaned above me, shifting again. The shattered mirrors across the walls whispered, even in their broken state. The shards caught dim glimmers of light that flickered, as if the house was breathing. And the reflections within them didn't move like my body did. I should have run, but there was nowhere left to run to. The breach was here. It had always been here. The house was simply a vessel. The phone on the wall rang once, sharp, loud, like a scream splitting through the thick air. I staggered to my feet and lifted the receiver with trembling hands. "Ethan." It was Mrs. Granger again. "They're inside now, aren't they?" she said, her voice shaking. "I felt it. The whole town feels it. You've gone too far." I could barely speak. My throat was raw from screaming. They showed me him. Daniel Mercer. He's still here." A silence on the other end, then a soft, pained whisper. "They never let go of the offering. Once you open the door, everything that came through stays." My voice broke. "How do I close it?" Another silence. "You don't." I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting tears, the weight of inevitability sinking into my gut. "There's someone else who might know more," she finally said. "Paul couldn't tell you everything, but he wrote things down before the madness took him." "Where?" I croaked. "The church records." Her voice was barely audible now, like something was pulling it away. "The old Midtown evangelical. His confession notes are still in the safe beneath the chapel floor." A click. The line went dead. The house groaned louder now. The floor beneath my feet rippled like thin ice flexing under weight. But I had no choice anymore. The church. I grabbed my jacket, leaving the house behind as the air inside grew thicker with each passing second. The front door seemed reluctant to open, but finally gave way, releasing me into the sharp cold of the red hollow night. As I drove, the headlights cut through swirling fog, rolling down from black pines like fingers stretching toward me. Shapes seemed to shift behind the trees, shadows pacing me. When I finally saw the steeple emerge through the haze, I felt no comfort. The Midtown Evangelical Church sat hunched at the edge of town like an old animal waiting to die. Its doors were chained, but rusted enough that one hard yank with my crowbar snapped the links loose. Inside, the cold was even worse than the house. My breath crystallized in the air. The stained glass windows had long since blackened with grime, filtering what little moonlight remained into warped, pulsing colors across the chapel floor. I made my way down the aisle, the wood groaning beneath my boots, past the empty pews and toward the altar. The trapdoor was exactly where Mrs. Granger said it would be, half hidden behind the pulpit. I pulled it open and descended into the crawl space beneath. The walls were lined with rotting prayer books and rusted relics. At the far end stood a small iron safe, its combination lock broken from years of disuse. Inside the safe were several brittle notebooks, Paul's handwriting scrawled across their covers in fading ink. Confession of Paul Henderson. I sat against the cold wall and opened the first book, flipping through pages of desperate entries until one passage froze my breath. The door was opened once before the Caldwell family arrived, but that first family failed to pay. The creatures demanded new blood, fresh offerings to seal the threshold. Another page. The entity known as the beggar is not alone. It is only the herald. What waits behind it is far older. A third entry. The mirror trick was never meant to protect. It was only meant to delay. The reflections rot once the breach grows. When your own face turns, it's already too late. I swallowed hard, feeling my own reflection burning behind my eyes. Finally, the last entry. The only way to reseal is to reverse the offering, to deny the debt by confronting its first breach point. But the house won't let anyone get that far. The house belongs to them now. A rumble above me made the entire chapel shudder. The walls vibrated. The floor creaked. They knew I was here. The church doors slammed shut somewhere above, the chain links rattling like distant bells. Then came the knocking. Tap, tap, tap. But not from the church entrance, from beneath me, from within the ground. I bolted upward through the trap door, stumbling into the sanctuary just as the fog pressed fully against the stained glass, warping it into shapes that didn't resemble anything human. The pews creaked, not from me, from them, from the invisible things gathering inside. The door wouldn't budge. The knocking continued, growing faster, more erratic, coming from the very walls. I could feel them inside the building with me. The threshold wasn't only in the house now, it was spreading. The fog seeped through every crack, the church groaning as the temperature plummeted. I backed against the altar as the whispering voices filled the air once again, harmonizing in that same sick chant. You're almost ready. The whispering grew louder, bleeding into one another until individual voices merged into a single, dissonant hum. My head throbbed with it, my ears ringing as though some enormous, unseen pressure was bearing down on me. The temperature in the chapel plummeted so sharply that frost bloomed across the pulpit behind me. My breath turned into thick white clouds, fogging the air in short bursts. You're almost ready. The phrase pulsed again, vibrating through my chest, repeated endlessly like a mantra spoken by a congregation I could not see. The fog seeped in fully now, swirling along the floor like some pale creature moving with purpose, surrounding my ankles, creeping higher. The stained glass above the altar shattered with a violent crack. Shards of crimson, blue, and gold rained down, scattering across the cold wooden floor like broken teeth, and then I saw them. Figures began to emerge from the fog, half-formed silhouettes. Their bodies twitched unnaturally, movements stuttering in jerks, as if skipping frames of reality. Their faces were pale masks of melted flesh, some bearing partial resemblances to people I recognized. My father, Daniel Mercer, even myself. Each figure blinked in and out of existence, rippling like static images caught between worlds. One stepped forward, closer than the others. It wore my father's face, or something wearing my father's face. His eyes were hollow, leaking thick black fluid that dripped down his cheeks. His mouth hung open far too wide, as if unhinged, revealing rows of jagged, mismatched teeth. Ethan, it rasped in a voice that almost sounded familiar but was bent, distorted. Let us finish. My legs refused to move. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but my body was frozen in place, as though my very bones had been claimed. The journal entries replayed in my mind. The house won't let anyone get that far. The house belongs to them now. But this was no longer just the house. It was everywhere. "You were born for this," the creature hissed, its voice splintered, layered, as though dozens of mouths spoke from within it. "The blood calls." I forced myself backward, stumbling across broken glass toward the side entrance, desperate to find any exit not yet sealed. My hand found the heavy wooden door. Locked. Behind me, the fog continued thickening, swirling upward as if alive, forming twisting spirals above the congregation of broken figures. Their chant continued, growing more distorted, rising in tempo. "Ready, ready, ready." I slammed my shoulder into the door once, twice, until the rotted hinges finally gave way. The heavy door crashed open, spilling me into the freezing night air. I barely noticed the jagged scrape across my arm from the broken frame. My blood spattered onto the snow-dusted ground beneath me, steaming faintly as it hit the cold. The wind howled now, not a natural howl, but something deeper, something that sounded almost pleased. I ran blindly through the darkened streets of Red Hollow, every step sending sharp pain up my side. Shadows darted between the trees lining the road, keeping pace effortlessly, whispering alongside me, mimicking my ragged breathing. When my house came back into view, it felt like running toward a burning building. The front door was wide open. The breach was complete. I froze just beyond the threshold, unable to step inside. "Ah!" The air pulsing outward from the doorway carried the same rotting copper scent, stronger than ever now, almost sweet. The living room beyond was soaked in a spreading pool of dark liquid that reflected faint shapes swirling just beneath its surface. The walls breathed again, expanding and contracting with rhythmic, wet sounds. At the center of it all stood the mirror, or rather, what was left of it. The glass was gone, but the frame had become wrong, distorted, warped into an oval aperture that seemed to shimmer and pull at the air around it. Behind that frame, something enormous pulsed faintly, a glimpse, a suggestion. Limbs that weren't limbs, eyes that weren't eyes. A presence so vast my mind rejected its scale instantly. This wasn't just about my father, or Mercer. This was what they all served. The thing that waited behind the rules, the true door. Suddenly my body moved, not by my will, but as though pulled by invisible threads. My feet stepped forward across the bloody threshold. Inside, the whispering stopped. The house exhaled once, deeply. The thing wearing my father's face stood before me again, smiling wide, arms outstretched. "It's time, Ethan." My vision blurred, my pulse roared inside my skull. My blood pounded against my temples. The frame behind him pulsed, vibrating in tandem with my heart. I heard a voice then, one that wasn't theirs, one that cut through the noise. My father's real voice. "Break it, son. You have to break the chain." My eyes shot toward the object clutched in my shaking hand. One of Paul's confession notebooks, pulled from my jacket during the fall. The pages fluttered open as wind screamed through the open door. There, etched crudely onto the back cover, was the same symbol I'd seen before in my father's journal. The seal. Seal breach point, only temporary. It wasn't a solution, but it was a weapon. My fingers dug into my pocket, pulling out the small pocket knife I kept since I first moved back. The edges of reality blurred as the figures circled around me, chanting again. "Ready, ready, ready." With a burst of desperate strength, I lunged toward the warped frame of the mirror. The cold air screamed as I pressed the blade into my palm, drawing a line of blood, and slammed my bleeding hand against the frame, pressing it over the drawn seal. For a brief second, one breathless moment, everything stopped. The frame pulsed once, then again, and then it cracked. The sound of the crack echoed unnaturally through the house, as though the walls themselves registered the rupture. A pressure I hadn't realized was crushing me suddenly lifted, like being released from underwater after holding my breath too long. The warped mirror frame trembled, pulsing erratically. Thin, jagged fractures spiderwebbed outward from where my bloodied palm had pressed against it. Each crack glowed faintly, a sickly orange red like cooling magma. The figures surrounding me recoiled instantly. Their chanting collapsed into broken, overlapping gasps. like air had been stolen from their lungs all at once. No. The thing wearing my father's face let out a sound I can only describe as reverse breathing. A violent, sucking scream as it stumbled back toward its eyes flickered, twisting between familiar features and the slick, rotted flesh beneath. "You were meant to finish this," it hissed, voice distorting as its form glitched between faces. My father, Daniel Mercer, myself, and dozens of other broken identities I couldn't even name. But the seal was working. The house shuddered violently, beams groaning, windows rattling. Small objects toppled from shelves and ceiling plaster rained down like snow. Behind the frame, the thing that waited, the one that had never fully stepped through, began to retreat, like a hand being pulled back through a narrowing hole. The swirling mass of wrongness faded deeper into the shimmering void, its shape unraveling into chaotic strands that snapped and writhed as the breach began to collapse. The whispering grew desperate. "Almost ready, almost ready, almost..." I stepped back from the frame, still clutching my bleeding hand, watching as the light inside dimmed further. But the house fought back. A deep groan erupted from beneath the floorboards. Cracks tore across the living room as the entire foundation shifted. Black fluid seeped upward through the fractures like veins bursting beneath the skin. And then, one final knock. Tap, tap, tap. It didn't come from the door. It came from everywhere. The last of the reflections still lingering in the broken shards around me convulsed violently. Each of my distorted doppelgangers screamed in unison before shattering into smoke, evaporating like steam. The mirror frame finally split at its center with a deafening snap, collapsing inward on itself like a dying lung. The air rushed inward, pulling loose papers, furniture, and debris toward the shrinking void. The house howled, and then silence. For several long seconds, I stood alone in the ruined living room, my chest heaving, the cold air sharp in my lungs. It was over, or so I thought. The floor beneath me trembled once more, subtly this time, and from the deepest part of the house, somewhere far below even the basement, came a different sound, a heartbeat. Deep, slow, ancient. My stomach twisted violently. This wasn't the source. I had sealed a gate, but not the gate. Suddenly I felt it, that impossible gravity, pulling me forward again, as though invisible strings were tied to my spine. The house wasn't finished. The rules weren't finished. The door was still open somewhere deeper. I staggered into the hallway, following the pulse, moving like a man walking toward his own funeral. My bloodied hand left smears on the walls as I steadied myself. The basement door stood open again, inviting. No longer merely a basement, it had changed. A narrow stone staircase now spiraled downward into the earth, where before there had been only concrete walls. The air that rose from below was damp, warm, and nauseatingly sweet. The house was growing, or perhaps it had always been this deep. Step after step, I descended into the belly of the thing that had lived beneath my family's skin for generations. The flickering remnants of electricity barely reached this depth. Shadows gathered thick around my flashlight beam, bending unnaturally. Finally, the stairs ended in a vast chamber carved directly into the bedrock. The space pulsed gently, walls breathing in rhythm with that steady heartbeat. At the center of the room stood a stone archway, ancient and cracked, embedded into the earth like a wound. Symbols covered its surface, jagged lines matching the seal in my father's journal, but far older, deeper, carved by hands that didn't resemble anything human. And within the arch, nothing. No light, no shadow, no movement, only absence. The true breach. A low whisper slid from its edges, like breath escaping a throat too dry to speak, but the blood remains unpaid. Behind me I sensed movement. I turned slowly. They were here again, but fewer now. The remaining reflections of myself stood at the chamber's edge, watching with hollow, sunken eyes. No more twisted smiles, only blank hunger. One of them stepped forward, reaching out its hand. It was me, but not me. Its face carried all my exhaustion, my guilt, my failure, my worst self. I knew, with terrifying clarity, what this was: the final offering. The cycle demanded someone, either them or me. My fingers twitched toward the knife, still clipped to my belt. The rules had shifted, but one choice remained. I either break the chain forever, or pass it to another version of myself and start the horror anew. I was running out of time. The chamber pulsed with that steady, slow heartbeat. Each beat rippled through the stone floor beneath my feet, vibrating up my legs and into my chest like the ancient breath of something waiting just beyond the archway. The other versions of me stood perfectly still along the chamber's curved edge, like sentinels, like witnesses. Their hollow eyes watched as I hesitated before the black doorway, the knife heavy in my hand, my own breath rasping out into the damp air. "The blood remains unpaid," the whisper came again, curling like smoke from the void. The air around me thickened, as if the space itself was compressing. My head throbbed, my body trembled. I stared at the figure directly in front of me, my mirror self. He reached toward me again, palm open, silent, almost pleading. The gesture wasn't aggressive. It was invitation, temptation. "Pass it to me," the silence seemed to say. "Let the chain continue. You don't have to carry it." I could feel its pull, almost comforting in its seduction. The promise that I could walk away, that my nightmare would end, if only I handed it off, as my father had before me. But my father's voice cut through the growing fog in my mind again. "Don't make my mistake." I clenched my jaw. If I chose to pass this to my reflection, the cycle would reset. Someone else, perhaps even another version of myself, would suffer as I had, trapped in an endless loop of horror. The bargain would survive. The door would stay open. I took one step back. The reflection tilted its head, confused. Its expression shifted, momentarily flashing desperation, then rage. The chamber pulsed violently, dust falling from the ceiling. The reflections along the chamber walls grew restless, twitching and flickering, mouths widening but producing no sound. Their hollow gazes bore into me like nails. "Choose," the whisper demanded. My grip on the knife tightened. I didn't come this far to hand it off. This ends with me. With a cry that tore from the deepest pit of my lungs, I drove the blade into my own palm once more, cutting deeper this time. My blood spilled freely, warm and bright against the cold air. I staggered toward the ancient arch, pressing my bleeding hand directly against its stone surface. The symbols ignited instantly, brilliant, burning with a sharp white light that sliced through the darkness like lightning. The entire chamber shook. The ground beneath my feet cracked. The reflections shrieked in unison, a wail of pure agony as they convulsed violently, collapsing one after another like puppets with their strings cut. The void within the archway writhed furiously. I could feel its fury radiating out like heat from a furnace as tendrils of black mist lashed against the boundaries, desperate to remain anchored. "You cannot break what you are," the voice screamed, its many layers vibrating the very air around me. But the light from the seal burned hotter, brighter. My blood fed it. My choice fed it. The pulsing slowed. The tendrils withdrew. The doorway, that wound in the world, began to constrict. Stone ground against stone as the arch folded in on itself, groaning and shrieking like a living thing dying at last. The heartbeat slowed further, one last deep thud that shook the air like thunder. Then silence, real silence. The chamber grew still. The air lightened. The oppressive weight lifted off my chest like an invisible hand had finally let go. My legs buckled and I fell to my knees, breathing raggedly as blood dripped from my hand, pooling at my feet. The archway was gone. Only bare stone remained where it once stood. The reflections had vanished. No shadows remained lurking at the edges of the chamber. It was over. For the first time since I returned to Red Hollow, I was truly alone. I don't remember how I found my way back upstairs. My mind drifted in and out, my steps clumsy and mechanical as I climbed the endless spiral back to the world above. By the time I pushed open the front door, dawn had broken over Red Hollow. The town was bathed in pale gold light, soft mist curling gently across the distant pines. The house stood quiet behind me, no longer breathing, no longer watching. I stepped out into the morning air, tasting freedom like something new and strange. A pair of headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. Mrs. Granger's old sedan rolled to a stop, and she stepped out carefully, her eyes wide as she studied me, then the house. "It's done?" she asked, almost afraid to believe it. I nodded weakly, my voice hoarse. "It's done." Tears welled in her eyes as she exhaled a shaky breath. "No one's ever broken it before." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. She helped me into her car, and we drove away from that house for the last time, leaving behind the place that had fed on my family's blood for generations. As we pulled onto the highway leading out of Red Hollow, I glanced back one final time. The house stood there beneath the rising sun, looking almost ordinary. But deep beneath its foundation, far beyond sight, I knew the scars still remained. Sealed, but not erased. And some doors, even when shut, will never be forgotten. Thank you for staying with us through the haunting journey of the door between worlds. Red Hollow's dark secret has finally been sealed. But as always, some nightmares never fully disappear. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with fellow horror fans. Your support helps us continue bringing chilling tales like this to life. And remember, some doors are better left unopened. We'll see you in the next story, if you dare.